So there's a lot that goes into building a 38-foot wooden boat from scratch like we're building here, and we don't always get to answer all the questions that we'd like. So we're just about to get into planking, which is super exciting, but this video is going to be a little bit different than what we usually do. Kind of want to do a little house cleaning before we get to that kind of stuff and answer a bunch of the questions that we've had recently. So this video is going to be a lot of just that question and answer kind of stuff, not much of the boat building, which is what we typically do. So just a little warning ahead of time. So another thing is we've had a lot of people ask for another t-shirt campaign. So we took that into consideration, and I'm wearing one of those right now actually. So we're doing a t-shirt just for the planking. So it's going to be an image of all of the tools laid out on the back of the shirt. And again, that's going to be through Bonfire. The link is going to be in the description below. It's a 2-week campaign from today. Basically the way that works is everybody puts in their orders and Bonfire will print them all at the end of those 2 weeks and ship them out to you. So thank you guys so much for supporting us, and let's get on to the video.
Well, since we recently did the bronze floors, I guess we might as well start there. So through the whole process of making the bronze floors, people kept asking again and again about the added weight. Because as you can see, they weigh a little bit more than the wooden floors that the plans called for. The same thing with, we're going to put on some oak planks down lower here, and those are also going to add a little bit more weight than the plans called for. But honestly, this added weight, especially so low in the boat, is not much of an issue because according to the plans, we should have 5 inches of concrete with boilerplate punctings in it in the bilge. So basically the bilge should be filled up to about here. It's full length from stem to stern, more or less, with concrete with steel in it. And that should add up to roughly another 3,000 pounds of internal ballast. As you can imagine, that concrete and all that steel would not be so great for the bilge, and if you ever need to do some work, you have to remove the concrete, which requires a jackhammer, and that does not sound like a good time. So another solution, which is the route that we're going to go, is to put in some lead ingots into the bilge. So for every pound of bronze or oak that we put down here low in the boat, that's 1 less pound of lead that we need to put into the boat. And a big reason for having internal ballast is that you can shuffle it around. So if we load up for cruising and we find we're sitting below the waterline, we can jettison some. If we launch and we find out that we're listing to port or starboard, fore and aft, whatever, we can move it around as well and make sure that she balances. And if everything is down here in the bottom in the lead, you don't really have that option. So some internal ballast is really important. And the bronze floors are just a drop in that bucket. So speaking of bronze floors, the floors in the stern are obviously very large and very heavy and very diesel, so that they can support our diesel. So let's climb into the boat and go take a gander at that and talk about the diesel.
Since we're climbing around in the bilge here, this seems like a great opportunity to talk about something that people have been mentioning quite a bit. In regards to the bolts that we have down the center line and that are holding down the bronze floors, we've had a lot of people mention torque wrenches and kind of torquing them to spec. And the reason we're not doing that is it's not necessarily going to be very beneficial for us. Wood is something that moves quite a bit. It's going to shrink and swell. So even if we were to get them to the right torques at that moment, they're going to change down the line. So right now we've got them kind of torqued down to tight fit, but once we are ready to get back in the water, once we're ready to get into the water, we're going to torque them down a little bit more and they should be fine. The beauty about this too is that the bronze does have some elasticity to it, so as the wood swells, they will have a little give to them. So they should be perfectly fine. So now let's look at that engine.
So back here on these beautiful Black Locust engine beds is where Arabella's diesel is eventually going to sit. And the diesel has been kind of a long, big decision for us to make. There's been a lot of things to weigh. One of those was we got the Perkins diesel that came with Victoria, which was originally built in 1987. It was rebuilt in the 90s, supposedly. There didn't seem to be any major issue with it, but it is an older diesel, and they quit making the Perkins quite a while ago. So parts, although available, might not be that accessible in 10 or 15 years if it's time to do another rebuild. On the other side of that, a new diesel is not cheap. So initially we thought it was going to be around 20,000 to put a new diesel in the boat, and after doing a little more research and actually calling and getting a couple quotes, we found out it was closer to 18,000 for a new diesel. And that's still a pretty big chunk of change, especially for us. So we were really kind of trying to weigh the pros and the cons of the old diesel versus the new diesel. So if we were going to do a new diesel, our choice would be to go with a Kubota-based diesel. And the reason for that is Kubotas are used all over the world. Parts are really widely available. If you open up the hood of just about any Bobcat, you'll find a Kubota diesel in there. I've used and abused them many times in my life. So I know that they're good, solid power plants. And there's a couple different companies that marinize the Kubota diesels and get them ready for the marine environment. And one of those companies is Nanny, and they're out of France. So we reached out to Hansen Marine, which is in Marlborough Head, not too far from here, just to get a price quote and see what was going on with the Nannies. And John was kind enough to offer us a little bit of a price break, as well as the Nanny manufacturer, the marinizer, was actually willing to give us a little bit of a break as well. So between their powers combined, the price of the diesel dropped to be a little over 10,000 for us to get it into the boat. Which, considering that to rebuild the Perkins, which was originally built in 1987, was supposedly rebuilt in the 90s, we don't really know how it was treated. And since they stopped making the Perkins in the 90s, parts, they're still widely available, but they are slowly and will continue to get slowly harder to find. So 10, 15 years from now, if we're going to go do a rebuild, the parts for the Kubota are going to be a lot more readily available than the parts for the Perkins. So we were weighing all these pros and cons, and then when John and Nanny said that they could help us out a bit with the price, and then our friend Andrew, who's restoring a 100-and-something-year-old Cornish lugger, I think it is, down in Mystic, Connecticut. It's a really cool boat, and he's doing it on the epitome of a shoestring budget. I mean, I think he spent a couple $100 framing his boat. We'll let Andrew explain that in a little more detail later. But he had mentioned that he would be interested in the Perkins if we weren't going to use it. So when we found out that we could get the new Nanny for just a little over $10,000, and that Andrew could really benefit from getting the Perkins and the tanks from that, that really clenched the deal for us. And then we got offered a couple really awesome machines that we'll go look at in a minute, and we needed a hand moving them. So we got a hold of Andrew and said, hey, can you come up and give us a hand moving this equipment, and we can talk about the diesel. He came up, and it was really awesome to just load the diesel and the tanks in the back of his truck and send him home with them. And to see the smile on his face for that was worth whatever we could have sold the diesel and the tanks for. So it's really great that, you know, John and Nanny are willing to help us out a little bit, and that we could pass that savings on to Andrew and help him out with his build. Because he really could use the help, and he's doing a phenomenal job, and we really want to see him succeed in that endeavor and be able to go sail with him down the road. So between those two, it made a pretty easy choice. So we built these engine beds with the Nanny in mind, and it should just plop right in there, and we'll get that delivered from Hansen Marine later on this summer. So before we go check out those machines, there's one other thing we wanted to chat about, and that is how we figure out measurements inside of the hull when we're working on things. So for example, when we put in the engine beds down here, we used the spirit level to do that, and we had a few people ask us how we could do that, what we were basing that off of, because if you look around, everything's curved. There's nothing that is plumb or straight or square or any of that. So it's a little bit of a different mentality working inside the boat than, say, on a house. So what we have in the boat is the reference lines, and if you think about back to when we were lofting, we drew that big grid. That grid is still in existence in the boat, you just can't see it. But it's marked here. So if you look here, we have like LL4, LL2, and the load at waterline. And these are marked along with some other marks on all of the stations down the boat. And by connecting those, it makes a grid. So the stations stand perfectly vertical, and all of that is based off of the waterline. So the waterline is the foundation for the boat, more or less, in terms of measurements. Everything is based off of that waterline. So when we set up the boat, we made sure that that waterline was perfectly level fore and aft, as well as port to starboard. So when we set up the molds, we set up the backbone, we were really meticulous about that. And that way, throughout the rest of the build, all we have to do is grab a level or a plumb bob or a couple strings, and we can find and very accurately measure at any point in the boat. Because we can just go from LL2 to LL2, and then out whatever we need to distance level-wise, and we can find a spot out here in space. And since the engine beds are parallel to the waterline, we could just throw a level on it, and it's really easy. Now, since this is so important to us that the waterline of the boat is level fore and aft and port to starboard, it's something that we check on a fairly regular basis. So if you look up here, we have a big level sitting on top of the molds. And we just, every once in a while, throw it up here and make sure that we're still level from starboard to port. And then we'll throw it from molds to molds and make sure that we're still level fore and aft. And if for any reason we throw the level up there and we find it off kilter, then we'll know that we need to go through and jack up the boat and move things a little bit, because we are on a dirt floor. It does freeze and thaw here, and that stuff can move. But so far, it hasn't moved one bit. And the other reference point we have is a wire that goes from stem to stern all the way down the boat, and it's up above our heads here, and it's lined up with the center line of the boat. So at any point we can throw a plumb bob on there and hang it down, and as long as that is in line with the center of the center line, then we know that the boat hasn't racked or done anything funky. And those are things that we check fairly periodically, because if we didn't check them and they got out of whack and we still based things off of them being level, we could really mess things up and be in big trouble. So that's how we keep things straight and find points that are out here amongst all of these curves. So we're saying goodbye to Victoria's diesel and fuel tanks, which obviously means that we're putting a new diesel and new fuel tanks into Arabella. Part of that is because we got offered a pretty good deal on a new diesel, and another part of that is that we knew that Andrew here could really use our diesel and fuel tanks from Victoria.
I really can.
So it's a win-win, and I will let Andrew tell you a little bit about what he's got going on.
Yeah, so I'm restoring a boat called Rosalind. She's a Cornish lugger built in 1903 in St. Ives on the north coast of Cornwall. She's very old and needs a lot of work, but I've been going at it for 2 years now, and this is exactly the engine I need. So thank you guys again. It's very extensive restoration. I'm trying to keep anything that I can that's original. So I try to take the approach of spending as little as possible monetarily, but putting inevitably more time and effort into things so that I'm not breaking the bank. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but definitely worked with my framing. I finished framing for just over $200. So, and she's a 40-foot boat that displaces 22 tons. So I think I did all right with that.
So yeah, you can check out Andrew on Instagram, and we'll definitely be checking in with him and seeing what he does with the diesel. And if you're at the Mystic Boat Show this year, Andrew's doing a talk about his build on Friday. So we will be there, he will be there. Check it out, come see us. So these are the aforementioned machines. Pardon the lighting and the mess, we're still getting everything set up. So this is a Seneca Falls metal lathe, and that is a Bridgeport milling machine. And I know, what do we need this equipment for? We're building a wooden boat. But honestly, these are going to be so useful for us down the road. And I mean, even in the near future. So a really great thing with these machines is they can work metal, but they also can work wood. So we can do a lot of really meticulous wood machining on them and turning if we need to. And Joe, who's been helping us out with the machining stuff, like for the rivet press and the backing iron that we're going to use when we do the riveting, all that stuff, instead of Joe begging, borrowing, stealing shop time where he used to work, he can just come here and do it in-house, which is really awesome. And Joe's been helping us to get them all cleaned up and organized. He tore the head apart on the Bridgeport. And we have our friend Glenn who's been helping us out with the electrical, getting them wired up. One of our other volunteers who's been around a bunch, Randy, he's been coming by and helping to just scrub them all down and clean them up. Because these machines, they hadn't seen use in 10 years or so. So they're in great shape, but they needed some love. There was a giant mouse nest in the head of the Bridgeport that needed cleaning out. But all of that is getting done, and it's getting done while Alex and I are working in the boathouse on the boat, which is really phenomenal. So thank you guys for coming over and helping us out with this. And a really great thing with Joe is that once these are all up and running, he can teach us how to use them, and then Alex and I can start running them ourselves, which is going to be really, really great. So these machines were donated to us by Kathy and Paul, who are out in eastern Massachusetts. And like we said, they've been sitting idle in their basement for a number of years. And they reached out and said that they were there, they believed they were in working order, and if we could put them to use, that we were welcome to them. We just needed to figure out how to transport them. So we gave our friend Tom with the tree company a call and said, hey, do you got a big trailer we could borrow? And we stole Tom's trailer for the day, and Andrew came up, like we mentioned, and helped us muscle him out of their walkout basement. So between Alex and I and Andrew and Paul's friend, we managed to get him up onto the trailer and get him home, and it was quite the endeavor. These puppies are not light. But now they're here, and they are almost in full working order, and it's going to be a real blessing to have these in the shop. And I know you probably don't think we're going to use them that much, but I'm pretty sure we're going to prove you wrong.
So we showed you all the metal lathe and the Bridgeport machine that we just got, and mentioned how one of the biggest things that's going to be is that we have access now to make ourselves things. And the big one for these is going to be stuff to make for the rig, which is something that we haven't really talked about yet. And a lot of people have been really curious about what we're going to be doing there. So we mentioned that we were going to go with the Gaff rig, which is, for those of you that don't know, with the Gaff up at the top, as opposed to the Bermudan rig, which has the triangular sails here. And there are multiple pros and cons to this, and everybody's going to have their own idea, their own thoughts on this, and we totally respect that, and we know that a lot of you are going to have some disagreements with what we say right now, but regardless, we'll get into all of those. So basically, when we started the project, we decided to go with the Ingrid plans. And the Ingrid was actually originally designed with the Bermudan rig, and kind of talking to people in the sailing world, we kind of started to realize that for what we are going to do, we were kind of leaning more towards a Gaff rig. So we kind of poked around a little bit more, and we ended up talking to Pat Atkin that runs the Atkin website, and there was actually a plan called Stormy Petrel, which is the same exact design hull as the Ingrid. So everything down here is the same, but she has a Gaff rig. So what are the differences in these? Basically, the biggest difference for us is that it's a lower aspect rig and it's under less tension. So the things that we want to do are kind of like, they're very remote. We want to go and do adventures all around the world, and having a lower rig, so it's 15 feet lower rig. I mean, the mast is 15 feet shorter than the Bermudan. If you look here, the two side by side, this looks just a little bit taller, but this boat is sitting a little bit farther down on the plans than this one. It is a dramatic difference. The other thing too is that the rigs are held together by dead eyes as opposed to turnbuckles, so much simpler systems, although there are going to be a little bit more lines, so more stuff to deal with. But for us, if anything were to happen while we're out on the water on these adventures, if the stay breaks or if the mast ends up breaking, we can always jury rig something with the gear that we're going to have on board. So that was a huge consideration for us. So basically, in the long run, we've decided to go with the Gaff rig, and if, God forbid, at some point we're out on the water and we end up not really liking that, we'll just make another one. We'll just get a bigger mast and we'll set ourselves up a Bermudan. So speaking about jury rigging, if we ever, God forbid, broke a mast, we could even go as far as to just go out and put a tree trunk in there. We could go and literally just cut a tree down and use that as a mast, which is something that we really couldn't do if we had a Bermudan rig. The Bermudan rigs usually run with a track up the mast so that the sail runs into that, and the Gaff rig would basically just be laced or have hoops, so we don't need to bother about any of that. So speaking about trees, there is one more talking point that we wanted to get to.
Trees, forests, and the ecological impact of us working out here and cutting them. So right around here is where we did our first cut when we initially began the project, and that was almost 3 years ago at this point, or actually a little over 3. And you can see the forest is absolutely just bounding back. And that's what happens here in New England. So if you cut strategically and if you cut carefully, things will just bounce back. So we've got a lot of first succession species in here, and we have a few that are going to be the primary. We've got a white oak here, another one back here, and another one there. And these will eventually all take off and become big, beautiful potential boatwood. So let's go look at a few other spots that were more recently logged, and we can kind of see some of the differences and how the forest here in New England recovers from being harvested. So this is an area that was logged just over a year ago in our last round of harvesting. So yeah, just a bit over a year ago, we were driving through here with the log skidder, and this was all pretty torn up. And as you can see, everything's growing back really quickly. So we've got a bunch of grasses that came in, we got a bunch of black birch here, and those are a lot of the first succession species. So what happens here in New England is you take down some trees and you punch a hole in the canopy, and all of a sudden the light comes in. When the light comes in, the birds come with it because they like these open places to fly around, obviously. And when the birds come in, they drop seeds that they ate and didn't fully digest, and then that leads to these grasses popping up, and that leads to a lot of our first succession species like the black birch and the sumac and these other things. So after one summer of growing, I mean, this is what it looks like. It'll fill even more in by the end of this summer. And in 2 more years, it'll look like the place where we previously looked, and all of this stuff will be up this tall. And what happens in the forest like this is you get what I said, the first succession and then the second succession species. So the first successions, they come in initially really quickly, like the grasses, like the black birch, alders can fall in that category, and they'll pop up really quickly, they go really fast, but they're not very long-lived trees, and they can't handle shade. No, they don't handle it very well. And then you get things like your ashes, your oaks, your maples, and they are more of a second succession. So they come up underneath these. So the oaks, they're a lot slower to grow, but it's really good that they grow that way because these guys will all take off, and the oaks are very shade tolerant, so they'll come up underneath them. And because they have all of these plants shading them, the oaks are going to just try to race to the top, which means they're going to grow tall, it means they're going to grow straight, and they're not going to put a lot of big branches down low, which really ruins the lumber. So that's pretty ideal conditions. And then as soon as these little oaks get mature enough that they get past all of these first succession species, they'll shade the first succession species out, and they will take over. And that's only going to take maybe 30 to 40 years for that to accomplish, maybe even sooner. So in 30 years, all of these little oaks are going to be seed trees. They'll be oaks that are, yay big and big enough to start generating acorns. And at that time, a lot of the seed trees that we left will be mature enough that they will be harvestable. So here in New England, if you do it on a schedule and let, Mother Nature take her time, you can come and log a section like this, let it recover, 20, 30 years, come back and log it again, and you can just keep doing that and do virtually no damage to the forest. If you look behind me, you'll see a whole bunch of brush up there on the hill. And what that is that's all logging debris. So that's all smaller branches and the tops of the trees. And the reason we leave it all just laying in the woods like this is because it's much better for the forest than actually if we were to try to clean it up or do anything with it. And the reasons for that are, one, it won't last very long. In a couple years, it'll all be rotten down, and it'll put a ton of nutrients back into the soil to feed the next generation of trees. Another reason is it provides great habitat. So while you have them sitting right on the ground, salamanders and that kind of thing love getting underneath them and living under there. Snakes hang out in there. Same thing with small rodents, rabbits, chipmunks, that kind of thing. They make great homes for them. And it also helps prevent erosion. And that's not really too much of an issue here. But as you can see, it's a bit of a hillside. And if we were to get a really heavy rain right after we logged, having all of those branches laying on the ground, stuck in the ground, are just gonna help keep that soil together until all of this growth comes back. And as you can see, the growth comes back really quick. And like I said, that stuff's gonna rot down in a year or two, 3 or 4 at most. And you'll never even notice it's there. But in the meantime, it makes great habitat and it helps with any potential soil erosion. So this is a great example of what things look like kind of a year after they've been logged in a place that gets some sun. And let's head up a little bit farther, and there's a big hemlock grove, and we cut a few oaks out of there, and the conditions are very, very different. It's kind of cool to see the differences. So if you look behind me, you can see a bunch of hemlocks and some pretty big oaks. And you can see that back here, it has not rebounded nearly as fast, and that's because it's not getting as much sun. That's because, one, there's a bunch of big oaks up there, and two, there's the hemlocks, and their powers combined really shade the forest. So it's going to be a lot slower to bound back here, but that's not really a bad thing. It provides just open areas in the forest for critters to do their thing. Wild turkeys, for example, the males, they find an open spot in the forest in the spring, and they strut, and they call the females for breeding. So this is a perfect place for the turkeys to strut and do their thing. So it's not a bad thing for the forest. And if you look back, you'll see there's some pretty good sized oaks. And those are oaks that we purposefully left. And the reason is that we want them to, one, be seed trees, so they are plenty mature to generate acorns. And they'll generate acorns, which will slowly grow up here underneath the shade of the other trees and eventually become beautiful boatwood. And in 30, 40 years, somebody could come back here and they could harvest these seed trees that we've left. And by that point, they'll be plenty big enough to harvest. And they will then open up the canopy and let all of these younger oaks that are now, I don't know, probably 10 to 20 feet tall really take off and grow. And here in New England, if you cycle it like that and you give the time to the forest for it to recover and for those trees to grow, you can come back to the same patch and harvest it again and again and again. You just need to give it enough time to recover and grow and do its thing. So leaving those oaks behind, although tempting to cut them, they're going to leave a lot better lumber in the future. And the reason that we had such big, beautiful trees to cut to begin with is because my family's owned and managed this property for 5 generations and has done logging and cutting on it for 5 generations. And the reason we have those trees is because we've been very diligent about which ones we cut and when we cut them and how we cut them, so that we take the resources and use the forest, absolutely, but allow it to heal and to recover and to do its thing. We really, really, really appreciate everybody who's commented about us replanting the trees that we've harvested. And we are in full support of that and are really thankful and appreciative that that's even on your radar and something that you think about. We really think it's something that more people need to think about, because it is a very renewable resource if it is managed well. And hopefully we've showed that here in this little part of the world, in the way that we logged in this type of forest, that replanting is not really necessary. Mother Nature will do it faster and better with more diversity than we could ever hope to do it. Disturbances in forests are a natural thing. They've happened ever since forests have been a thing. And Mother Nature is very equipped to handle that for the most part, as long as it's not in too devastating of a fashion and you give it enough time. So here in New England, it does that quite effectively. So we're really, really fortunate that my family has this property and that they've managed it for timber and have been responsible in the harvesting that they've done over the years, so that we had the timber that we did to harvest for the boat. And without that, I don't think we would be building the boat. If we had to go buy the timber, we probably would be looking at 6 figures or more for the lumber that we've cut and milled. And we've cut and milled it all for maybe $6,000, plus some blood, sweat, and maybe a few tears. So cost-wise, going local, doing the work ourselves, working with local landowners who have some mature forests that they would like to have thinned and culled a little bit, has been very easy on our wallet and financially has made a lot of this possible, and that's really important to us. But almost more so than that is the almost lack of environmental impact that we've had by doing it this way. So here we came in the property here and we cut a bunch of oak and we cut a bunch of pine, and as you can see, there's a lot of mature trees left. The forest is bounding back quite quickly, and we really did no more damage than if we had had a really bad snowstorm or a hurricane come through. And same thing with the cedar that we harvested. It came from a very mature stand. A lot of those trees were dying. They were on their way out. They were really old, and they were going to start taking the younger trees with them. So by going through and carefully felling them, carefully harvesting them, we are allowing those younger trees to have a better chance of growing up and becoming hopefully boatwood someday. So this environmental aspect of it is really, really important to us. And the trees, they take a long time to grow, and they take really specific conditions for them to become, high quality lumber like what we've been harvesting. And it's really easy to go in and clear cut an area and take a bunch of timber out and do a lot of long-term damage. And by us doing it ourselves and having control of it, we made sure that didn't happen. And figuring out where that lumber is coming from, whether you're cutting it yourself or whether you're buying it at the lumber yard, is something that we really hope more people consider and look into and figure out, is this sustainably harvested? Are we doing a ton of damage by taking these timbers? Is there a local source of something that's going to cause less of an issue to the environment but be just as effective? And we think that taking the time and the energy to look into that is really important. Because I would almost bet that almost no matter where you are in the world, if you were to really look and to do a little bit of digging, you could probably find timber for whatever project you're doing that does not have to get trucked halfway around the world, or that did not have to come out of an old growth forest where it's at this point almost irreplaceable. So it's something that's really, really important to us. It's on our radar, and we hope it's on yours as well. Because if it isn't, future generations will not have the opportunity to build boats like we're building and do the things that we're doing, because the materials, the resources, they just won't exist if we don't take care of them, or we don't manage them, and we don't use them in a responsible fashion.
So thank you for watching, and we hope that answered a bunch of your questions. We know we've gotten a lot of these, so we wanted to address those before we get into planking, which is coming right up, and we're super excited. And one final thing we want to say is to remember that we're going to be at the Mystic Wooden Boat Show, and that's going to be next weekend. That is June 28th, 29th, and 30th. And it's 2019 right now, for those of you in the future. And we're going to do something a little bit different this year. We are not going to be manning our own booth, but we're kind of going to be crashing other people's booths that have either helped us or are friends of ours. And we'll have a full schedule of where we'll be throughout the boat show that you can check on our website or on Facebook. So stay tuned for that.
All right, I'm going to need Akiva for this. Akiva, come here. Hey, come here. Yeah, that's a good boy. Come here. So for folks who follow us and are interested in wooden boats, you probably have come across this chap by the name of Leo with a boat called Tallyho on the West Coast. And Leo's restoring this big old beautiful sailboat. And it's kind of crazy that we're doing such similar yet such different things all at the same time. We get compared to Leo constantly, not always in a favorable light, but that's okay. He is, after all, a professional, and we are rank amateurs. But there's been some fun back and forth between some of our volunteers. So Leo had a few people come and write Acorn to Arabella on a couple stuff on the boat. And one of our volunteers saw that and kind of felt inspired. So they sent us, or actually they sent Akiva a package. Hey, you stay here. And they said, Akiva, a gift for you. I know you prefer popsicles, but Amazon doesn't carry. And the popsicle reference is that we do the open house every year, and we slaughter a lamb and a pig for the party. And some of the parts that we don't eat, we put in the freezer for Akiva. He loves them, and we joke that they are Akiva's popsicles. So that's where that reference is. And he says, the Tallyho boys were over the top with the t-shirt stunt. Give this the tennis ball treatment. And what the tennis ball treatment is Akiva likes to chew on them until they pop and disintegrate. So he also said this. And if you've watched Leo, you already get the reference. If not, go watch Leo. You'll get the reference. And Akiva, would you like to give the parrot the tennis ball treatment? Oh, yeah, he absolutely would. So, Akiva would very happily rip this thing from limb to limb if we let him. But we really like what Leo's doing. We think he's doing a fantastic job. And I don't really know if we want to have Akiva destroy the parrot. So, we're torn between doing that, letting him give it the tennis ball treatment, or sticking the parrot somewhere in the boathouse, and it's just kind of like a little mascot in the corner, and a little shout out to Leo. So what we want is just in the comments, just write tennis ball treatment, yes or no, and we'll give it a week or so. We'll tally it up, and then we'll either show you where the parrot lives in the boathouse, or we will show you Akiva giving it the tennis ball treatment. So yet again, go check out Leo. He's doing a fantastic job. Hopefully we'll see him out on the water someday. And
thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, and you can get notifications of all of our videos coming out. Remember, if you are subscribed though, to hit that little bell if you do want notifications. Otherwise, it doesn't always do that for you. So we'll see you guys in the next video.
Well, thanks a bunch. Okay, nope, leave it. Maybe later.